Podcast.
It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. David Hooper with you. BigPodcast.com is the website. And this podcast, all about growing your audience, all about getting people to spread your message for you, all about building a connection with listeners. It's not the typical podcast about podcasting. The only reason I'm going to talk about tech is if it is going to help you to grow your audience. It is not tech for the sake of tech. I don't care about new mics. I don't care about new technology. Unless it's going to help you grow your audience, spread your message, make more money with your podcast. This episode, it is the audio edition of Big Podcast Insider, and it is all about podcast branding. I call it Podcast Branding 101. It might be a 201, 301. I don't know. We're going to go deep into it, talk about how to be an influencer and make money doing it. Basically, you need three things to make this work. One, you need a powerful message delivered in the right way. Second thing, the right audience, not necessarily a big audience, although big helps. The right audience is more important than just big. I talked about this in the last episode. Oprah, big audience. But if it's not your audience, being on Oprah, that's not going to help. If you're a dentist and you want to speak to other dentists, you want to go for a dental trade newsletter. Being in a newsletter for dentists, being on a podcast for dentists, that's going to help you so much more than a general Oprah audience. The third thing to make this work, the right deal. And I'm talking about the sponsorship or ad deal that you've got. I've talked about this a bit on here. My wife being a photographer, a lot of the work that she's got right now, because social media, because online advertising is such a big deal, it is dealing with people that would be considered influencers, reality television stars, other celebrities that they have influence online. They've got a following online. She's got a studio in our house. And sometimes the social media manager will come along for the shoot. It's mind-blowing some of the deals these guys are getting simply to do a sponsored post. And I'm talking 80 grand a pop. Insane, right? 80 grand. But we're talking big audiences here. That's not everybody. You might not be able to get 80 grand, but you don't have to have as big of an audience as you think if you've got the right audience. We're going to talk about that. Before I get into the specifics related to this issue, let me give you a couple general things. One, if you need help coming up with great episode ideas, you know the new book, 101 Podcast Episode Templates, that was made just for you. You can get it for 99 cents today. It is on Amazon, 101 Podcast Episode Templates. That offer and everything else that I'm talking about, it is linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Also, when it comes to spreading your message on social media, when it comes to spreading your message online, you got your podcast, you're looking to add a video component. An easy way for you to do that is Riverside. Riverside is used by 70,000 people and companies, ranging from online influencers like Gary Vee, Guy Raz, companies like Spotify and the New York Times. You're going to get a video element of the recording that you make. Not only that, Riverside's editor will let you transform long-form content into multiple pieces of short-form content. You can easily make these social media videos for Instagram, for Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, wherever you're posting your short-form video content. It's part of a complete strategy these days. Audio is great. You know I love audio. Rarely ever do I do video myself, except for these short-form videos on social media. Riverside makes it easy. You can try it free, riverside.fm. I got a code for you. If you decide to become a member, you'll get 15% off, and that code, it's easy to remember. It's Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. It's Big Podcast. That's one word, BIGPODCAST. That's riverside.fm. Check it out. It's an easy way for you to get good social media content if you want to add to what you are doing with your podcast episodes. And I talked about this on the last episode. It's great for you to have a podcast, but if you've got a book that goes along with that podcast, a newsletter, a good social media presence, any of those other elements that you were going for make your podcast more powerful. For me, the newsletter that I've got, newsletter.bigpodcast.com, that made the podcast more powerful. The podcast makes the newsletter more powerful. It's funny how it works. Don't just take my word for it. Try it for yourself. Riverside.fm if you want to get some of those short video clips for your next interview. Try their software and also try this technique. Put some of that content on social media. See how it works for you. Riverside.fm. The code if you want that 15% off, Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. When you hear this sound, that's how you know it's time to turn the page. And here we go. over 4,000 subscribers in the last 9 weeks. Not bad. How do you do it? I'm going to tell you. This is the perfect thing for me to lead with, as it's an example of how growth in podcasting works, how growth in books works, how those book reviews that you see on Amazon work. I just saw a book, 20,000 reviews. So how did that happen? Didn't happen overnight. It starts slow and then it picks up. That's how your subscriber base is going to work for social media, for your podcast, for anything that you do. Here's the breakdown of how this lady did it. 1 year is how long it took to get 3,000 subscribers. She said that was slow. I said, yeah, that's somewhat slow. That's not bad. 3,000 in a year. It's not sexy. Everybody's throwing these big numbers out like it's nothing. Oh, I sold 50 million books. Okay, great. But 3,000, that's a lot of people. If I could go on tour as a musician, play to 3,000 people every night, if you could get in a venue and speak to 3,000 people every night, how amazing would that be? 3,000, that's not bad. And if they're engaged, that is enough for you to make a good living as an influencer, as a podcaster, as an author. But that's just the start. Once you get to that level, that's when things can suddenly take off. And for her, 9 weeks, 4,000 additional subscribers. This isn't that rare. I've seen a lot of people do it. Here's some of the tips that she mentions. You can do this yourself. One, you need to constantly remind people to subscribe. That's what I do on this episode every single time. That new book that I mentioned, 101 podcast episode templates. I'm mentioning that because I want you to buy it. You haven't bought it yet, have you? Why don't you do that? What are you doing? You listening to this podcast? You haven't even bought this 99-cent book? I kid. Look, if it's for you, get it. But the point is, you've got to mention it. You got to mention it a few more times than you would think. You're not annoying people. Just keep mentioning it. Fly that flag. And once you do, this is a book example, and this is a podcast example. You want reviews? You got to let people know that you want those reviews. Do not just assume they know how important that is. So if you do go get that book, 101 podcast episode templates for 99 cents, please do leave a review. Constantly remind people to subscribe. Constantly remind them to review. That's number one. Number two, optimize your subscription page. I've got a page that's optimized. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. It is the subscription page for this podcast. It's at bigpodcast.com/subscribe if you want to go directly to it. Feel free to steal that idea for your podcast, by the way. Feel free. Download the graphics, take the layout. It's at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Third thing, you got to give people a reason to respond. This is giving them a reason to interact with you. It's great advice for email subscribers because it's going to help your delivery rate. It's also great advice for podcast subscribers. The way you can do it for podcast subscribers is to have multiple episodes available when people subscribe. In my book, Big Podcast, the first one, not the second one, not the episode templates book that I was just talking about, I talked about launching with 25 episodes. And people say, that's crazy. That would take me half a year because I only do one a week. All right, got it. Well, step it up a little bit. Launch with a few, 10, 15, 25. 25 is an arbitrary number. The reason I want you to do that is because when somebody subscribes to your podcast, that is the most excited that person is going to be about your podcast. They are hot and they are ready to listen. So if you can get them engaged very quickly with multiple episodes, not just that one that caused them to subscribe, that makes it part of a daily routine. You might have a podcast like that, maybe a news podcast comes out daily. Every morning you listen to it. It's part of your routine. Because it's part of your routine, you are a very valuable listener. And this is what I talk about when I talk about the size of an audience. Not all audience members, not all listeners, not all subscribers are equal. The kind of person that you want listening to your podcast listens to every episode, takes action on the things that you talk about, is a good match for, and buys the stuff that is sponsoring you. And you can build these subscribers by giving them a reason to respond and take action immediately after subscribing to your podcast. Fourth thing that she talks about delivering surprise value. For podcasters, one of the best ways I've seen to do this is a quick start episode that shows listeners how to get the most from your podcast or shows them how to do something right away. For example, let's say I was doing a podcast about dating and relationships, trying to help you get more dates. Maybe I got some pickup lines in there or something. I've got something you can take action on right away. I say, go to a bar tonight, go up to somebody that you find attractive and use this pickup line. If you get engagement from that, if that person responds to you in the way that you want, you're going to say, whoa, David is a genius. Better listen to this podcast a little bit more. That's what I'm talking about and what she's talking about when she talks about delivering surprise value. Fifth thing, I talked about this a little bit. The first 3,000 took her a year. Second 4,000, 9 weeks. So this thing is ramping up. Your subscription numbers, your influence, the money that you make, that's going to ramp up too. Be patient. It does not happen overnight. You've got to keep at this. Everything that I've just talked about, it's linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Go there for more details. This stuff works, but you've got to put it into action. So go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com and make that happen. 24 perfect moments to use email signature banners to boost your podcast. Speaking of slow and steady, this is one of my favorite slow and steady techniques. I've talked about it before. One of the best things you can do as far as efficiency of your time is an email signature. It's not sexy. Last month, I think I got 70 extra listeners, 70 something, to the podcast because of my email signature. And I'm not sending out a lot of emails. It's not a lot of people. It's effective for the amount of emails that I'm sending out, but it's also not any work for me. I set the thing up. It took 10 minutes, popped it in, done. Once you get it set up, it does its thing on its own. And it's cheap. I've got a tool. It's $9. You don't even need the tool, though. That's just going to make it a little bit easier for you. You can do it directly from your Gmail account with the Gmail account that you've already got now. That's the foundation. If you really want to go big, though, got 24 ways to do it. You're going to get some good ideas on this. We've been using email signatures for years. 30 years I've been doing email signatures. It takes a lot to surprise me, something I haven't seen before. They got it. 24 ways to use them. This will help you get more subscribers for your podcast. And you can find this information, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Which podcast artwork do you like best? How many times have you been on Facebook, social media? You see the question, which podcast artwork do you like best? Which book cover do you like best? And you'll see a choice, 1, 2, maybe 3 different covers. You got people trying to choose the one that they're going to use for their podcast, for their books, different projects. This is a free image voting tool that handles everything for you. You simply send out a link, say, which one do you like best? People get to vote. You can share the results if you want. It keeps tabs on everything. That's real nice. See people do it on Facebook. Which one do you like best, A or B? Respond A, B, C. What? C wasn't even an option. They all suck. Whatever. You're giving people a choice. Do you want this one or this other one? Do you want milk or do you want water? That's what my mom used to do. She thought it was important for me to be able to make decisions and have a choice, but she wanted to control the choices. Do you want milk or do you want water? She didn't offer me Kool-Aid, Coca-Cola, none of that. Limited choices. And that's what you want to do when you are in control of your podcast, but you want to open it up to the audience, open it up to your current listeners and say, which would you respond better to? It is a free image voting tool. I've got it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Hey, I got a question for you. Do you skip podcast commercials? You heard me talking about Riverside.fm. Sometimes I got commercials on here. It's a sponsored ad. I always work those into the content. You don't have me break into the content, play theme music, have a non-host read ad, something that I'm not even involved with. And the reason is because people skip those. When you're a great host, people stick around for the commercials. And this is why companies love advertising on podcasts. I've got a funny meme. If you're trying to sell advertising, you can actually use this meme to sell advertising. I'd love to know your thoughts about it. Do you skip podcast commercials? You can join the conversation. I've got the link for you to do that. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is a big one. This is how to make sponsors come to you. Your job as a podcaster is to be a leader. When you do that, sponsors come to you. And beyond that, when potential sponsors already know who you are from listening to your podcast, from reading your newsletter, they sell themselves on working with you. When they do approach you, you don't have to convince them to do business with you. You don't have to convince them for the higher rates that you're charging. You get more money for the same work. I've got an interesting thread on this subject. I want you to read the comments. That's where the real info is. How to make sponsors come to you. That is linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Let's talk about brand deals one-on-one. If you want to set up a brand deal for yourself or your podcast, you can learn a lot from influencers, the guys on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. Like I mentioned, big money for a single shared image. Big money. It's crazy. And there are a lot of people, most of whom you have never heard of, who are doing this very successfully. I'll give you a story. 2 years ago, Lauren Flyman, she had only a handful of followers. She was a sales rep. COVID came along, shut everything down. So she started posting short videos of herself as she learned how to jump rope. She couldn't get to the gym. She started jumping rope. I know of her because I was in the same situation. The gym shut down. I needed some way to stay in shape. I started jumping rope. And I started to see people like her. They were going through the same thing that I was. They were posting themselves as they were improving on their jump roping. Fast forward to today. 1.1 million followers. Not only has she learned how to jump rope, she's got 1.1 million people following her. She's got her own signature jump rope. She's got deals with multiple apparel companies. Adidas is one of them. I've got a link to the story of why and how she started. I've also got an example of a lot of the traditional media exposure that she's had. She was in The Sun. That's helped her to grow her audience even more. And that is an example of the compound effect that I'm talking about. When you have more than one media, you got a podcast, do a newsletter. You got a newsletter, do a podcast. You got Instagram, do TikTok. You've got YouTube, do a podcast. You do live speaking, do a book. You've got a book, do a podcast. Not only does it increase your options of people seeing and hearing what you do, it also makes you look bigger. Not just double, not just triple, but exponentially bigger. Think about that. Go into a website. As featured in, then it's got your media appearances. You go to my wife's photography page, as featured in, Cosmopolitan, In Style, Us, People. That's the compound effect. It makes you look big. It makes you look more interesting. You can take advantage of this. Here's the question you may have. How do you take something from a hobby to something that you are making money with? Glad you asked, because I've got that linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. What should you charge? Who should you contact? What differentiates a good brand deal from a bad one? It's a video that you can watch, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. I'm going to wrap this up to a throwback about what I said earlier about growing your audience. Repetition helps. And if you haven't gotten the new book, 101 Podcast Episode Templates, it's 99 cents at Amazon.com. What do you have to lose? You'll get it delivered instantly. 101 Podcast Episode Templates, 101 easy episodes that you can create that will help you grow your audience, get more people interested in what you are doing, attract these brand sponsors. I'm talking about you branching out. I'm talking about books, blogs, public speaking, interviews. These things work as segments. You're going to get a lot out of this. It's the best 99 cents you've ever spent for your podcast and for spreading your message and growing your audience. 101 Podcast Episode Templates. It's available right now at Amazon.com. It is linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. If you have not subscribed to the podcast, let me give you a different link for that. It's bigpodcast.com. As I mentioned earlier, you can swipe the graphics, swipe the copy for your own subscription page. While you're there, subscribe to the podcast. You will never miss an episode. I'm here every week. I'm talking about this all the time. Growing your audience, spreading your message, making more money with your message. That's all I talk about. I'm singularly focused on those three things, and I'm going to help you do it for yourself. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Hit the button that works for you. iPhone, Android, RSS feed. One click is all it takes to subscribe and never miss an episode. You'll be hooked up. I'll be here working on the next episode, and you'll get it instantly delivered as soon as it's published. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.